Alright, I've already made a video on the first half page of this paper that I've drawn on. Of these designs of swords and knives that I've designed. I've already show you what they're called and what they're designed for and where I got the inspirations for their designs. So for this video, we're gonna dive into the second half of the page, talking about this one, from this one all the way to this one. First of all, let's start with this. This is called a trench cleaver. It's essentially a combination of a meat cleaver, a Bowie knife, and a knuckle trench knife. The features of a Bowie knife, as you can tell, is got this false edge and clip point, which also has a straight, broad blade, designed primarily for cutting and chopping. The features of a meat cleaver is quite obvious, as you can tell that the blade is primarily square in shape. And also the completely straight edge is also a feature of the meat cleaver. It's designed to cleave and chop through stuff. In terms of the handle, why I'm calling this a trench cleaver is because it's got this bumpy knuckle bow here, which is a feature of like First World War trench fighting knives, which allows the user to punch an opponent at a close distance when they're inside trenches or other like narrow bunkers that they may have to fight inside them. And just like the rest of them, is meant to be made from a single sheet of steel, and the hilt is meant to be riveted with handle scouts on both sides. As you can see, these three rivet holes. Yeah, why is it so hard to pronounce? Rivet holes. Yeah. So the second one will be called this grand sax. What it is essentially is a knife being scaled up to the size of a sword. It is roughly the size of I'd say a medieval arming sword, a standard one, and it is essentially a type of sax, S-E-A-X, which is a type of knife that was used by the Saxons and the Norse during the early medieval period. And it is essentially, largely the same as the Bowie knife, which they've got a similar shape, a similar size, and they were used under a similar context as well. Both were designed for a type of frontier and adventuring type of context. As you can tell that the blade shape is quite straightforward. It's a broad, straight, single-edge blade with a clip point. And when I first designed it, I drew a single fuller here, which I later realized that it's not enough to lighten the weight of it. Not enough to make it light enough to be a practical weapon in hand. So I added a second fuller in it. That will help further lighten its weight and making it more wieldy in the hand. But overall, this is still gonna be a forward-weighted, cut-oriented design. It will be designed primarily to be effective as a cutting and chopping weapon, and it can also thrust, but it will be not too great at doing so. Yes, as you can tell by the clip point, and it does have a point that you can use it to thrust, but it's gonna be like not as good as a thrust-oriented sword like some double-edged swords like gladiuses and daggers. Not that well. So the third one is literally a design disaster. It's called the oversized Celtic knife, which is designed based on the one at the far top of the page, the Celtic knife, the normal Celtic knife, I'd call it. Why is it a design disaster? Is that when I first drew it, I was wondering, should I draw a more slender blade, a narrower and thinner blade just like that of a saber? But back then I was not really good at drawing them, so I drew the blade to be overly wide, and so making it like this really awkward. And if it was ever made real, the point of balance is gonna be so far off. It's gonna be all the way here, making it really tip heavy and unwieldy in the hand. So this is not going to be a practical or any kind of useful weapon. If you're only using it as a tool for cutting, I mean, cutting stuff like firewood and vines and grasses, and it may make a little bit of sense, but as a weapon, it doesn't really make too much sense in practical terms. So the fourth one that I want to talk about is called this backsword. First of all, it's not designed based on the English backsword, which people typically associate with the term backsword. It is essentially a combination of a Bowie knife and a dusak. For those of you who don't know, a dusak is a type of sword that was commonly used in Central Europe throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. And what it is essentially like a military saber of the later periods, like the Industrial Revolution period, but it is usually shorter, and they come with a lot of different types of hilt designs. Some have more ornate and more elaborate, complex hilts, and more basic ones only have a single knuckle bow. And the most basic type of dusak that I've ever seen on the internet is one that is entirely made from a single piece of steel, just like these, and it's got a knuckle bow that is essentially an extension of the hilt that wraps around the handle area and curls all the way back to the base of the blade. And that's by far the most basic type of dusak that I can ever see. And this is essentially a similar concept in design, but the blade is straight. Yes, some dusaks are without a doubt straight bladed, and some are usually curved slightly backwards. And also the feature of the Bowie knife can also be seen here, as I drew this false edge and this clip point, which gives it better thrusting abilities, so it can like penetrate better inside the target. And the straight, broad, single edge blade is also a feature of the Bowie knife. And they usually don't have much distal taper because they're meant for chopping and primarily as a cut-oriented weapon, just like this one here. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is called falcaterized, which is a really funny name that I gave it. It's designed based on the classical Greek sword called a falcata, also known as a kopis. But why I'm not considering this a traditional falcata or kopis is that traditional ones tends to be more like these two. They tend to have a gradual curve back in the back. They don't usually have these straightened, like broken back type of back designs. That is more commonly found in knives like the sax and the Bowie. But this is essentially largely similar to the classical Greek sword, the falcata. But I'd say the biggest difference is in the knuckle bow. Yes, some of them do have quite a lot of hand protection. Some have even D guards, just like that of the early modern era swords. But they're usually constructed and connected in a way that's quite different from these. And this is also a more modern feature that I added to it. So let's move on to the last one. The last one is called a copatched, which is a kind of a funny, ridiculous name, and you can better call it a flat kopach because it's designed based on a classical Egyptian sword called a kopach, and but the biggest difference between this and the traditional one is that this has a long single type of edge in it. The traditional ones usually have a more curved part here and a straightened base of the blade. Around here is straight and around this is forward curved. But the concept overall is quite similar. It's meant to be curved forward. They've got points so they can thrust, but they will still remain primarily like 90% of the time a cutting weapon. Because yeah, it can thrust, but it's not gonna do it really well. All right, I haven't designed a false edge for it. It only had a simple drop points like this. And also the back portion is of the blade is concave and curved inwards. So it can help make the blade lighter and also more wieldy. Um, so it can also go in a sheath better because of this. And also, last but not least, having a blade this thin and also having this concave portion in the back of it uh, causes it to be much lighter, so it doesn't really need a fuller to further lighten the weight. And that's pretty much all that. Oh yeah, it's out of focus again. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about in this video, so thank you for watching.